Jamal Brooks had worked the night shift at Lumistraw for nearly a year, a French-American restaurant nestled quietly in a wealthier corner of Charleston, South Carolina. The place wore elegance like an old coat, soft music falling from the ceiling, chandeliers dimmed to cozy golden hues, and waiters dressed in black slacks and white shirts, their names stitched in cursive on linen aprons. To the customers, it was charming. To Jamal, it was a daily climb of invisible stairs, each step steeper because of the skin he was born into. It had been a long day. He'd cover for a coworker who never showed up, his feet aching for hours. At the back of the kitchen, he stole momentary glances at the wall clock. It was edging toward 11 p.m., and he hadn't eaten anything since 7 that morning. His stomach had learned the rhythm of sacrifice, but even hunger has its limits. By the time the staff meal was ready, a simple plate of grilled chicken, steamed rice, and greens, Jamal felt like he was about to pass out. Holding the plate with both hands, he let the warm scent rise to his face. It smelled like comfort, like something close to peace. He walked out of the kitchen, heading toward his usual quiet corner to eat, a million thoughts rushing behind his tired eyes. Tuition deadlines for his sister's college, his overdue rent, bounce notifications from his bank. Yet somehow, tonight, all of that quieted under the simple need to just eat something. But just as he reached the corner, the front door jingled softly. An elderly white couple stepped in from the night air, bundled in worn coats and scarves. The man was thin, with silver hair tucked under a battered fedora. His wife leaned gently on his arm, her face tired but filled with grace. They looked out of place, not because of their age. Plenty of older patrons came here, but because they had the appearance of having walked, not driven, of having searched, not lounged. Their clothes were clean, but old, their energy low. Immediately, the hostess began walking toward them, confusion rustling across her expression. She looked at her watch and then at the manager. "Oh, we're just looking for a place to sit down," the elderly man said softly. "Maybe a little something to eat, if it's not too late." "We're actually closing," the manager interrupted, his voice politely firm. "Kitchen's already shut down." Jamal stood frozen for a second, food still in hand. It wasn't hard to read the moment. The couple clearly didn't belong in this part of town, at least not by the restaurant's unstated rules. Their eyes scanned the room, maybe searching for a little compassion that wouldn't charge them $28 for a glass of Chardonnay. Jamal didn't think, didn't calculate. He just walked over, plate still in his hand, and said, "You can take this." The couple blinked at him. I don't understand," the woman said, half whispering. He held the plate out. "It's warm, fresh, and real. You look like you could use it more than I can. Please." The elderly man's brows furrowed. "Son, are you sure?" Jamal nodded. "I'm okay, honestly. Take a seat over here. No one's using it." They followed him slowly to a corner booth, eyes glistening with disbelief. The man pulled the chair out for his wife and helped her sit, his hands trembling slightly. Jamal placed a plate in front of them, went back to the kitchen quietly, and poured 2 glasses of water. "She diabetic?" he asked gently when he returned, remembering his mother's tired feet after her nursing shifts. "She is," the man answered, surprised. "I'll swap the rice out with some greens." "You don't have to do any of this," the old man said. "You don't know us." Jamal looked at them and smiled. "You don't know me either, but I was raised by a woman who taught me that kindness never makes you poor. And right now, y'all remind me of my grandparents." The couple sat in silence, perhaps stunned not just by the gesture, but by who it came from. A young black man, still in work clothes, skin glistening from sweat, clearly exhausted. Yet in this moment, he lived what many only preach. From a distance, the manager watched the exchange, not entirely pleased. Jamal ignored it. His stomach growled again, louder this time, but he turned away and washed his hands slowly in the back, forcing himself to think of something else. He imagined his sister walking across a college stage one day. That image helped. Meanwhile, the couple whispered gentle prayers before eating. The woman took small bites, holding her husband's hand tightly between movements. There was something sacred in that moment, A kind of quiet grace the world doesn't notice because it's not loud, expensive, or dramatic, just real. As Jamal passed by their table again, the old woman held his hand and looked up at him. Her eyes had pooled silently. "No one's ever done something quite like this for us," she said. "Well, I'm glad I could," Jamal replied softly. His hunger didn't go away, but something in him filled up in a different way. Something like dignity. Something like light. In the restaurant, others barely noticed. A few glanced. Some stared, not hostile, but not warm either, as if kindness from certain people only fits in specific narratives. But Jamal wasn't waiting for anyone's applause. He didn't do it for points or praise. He did it because someone needed help, and he had something to give, however small. And maybe in some small, strange way, a part of him was giving that food to his younger self, to the child who used to stare at empty plates, watching his mother pretend she was full just so he could take the last spoonful, to the teenager who saw stores lock their doors early when he walked by, to the man who still smiled, even when the world looked at him with suspicion. Tonight, that smile fed someone else. And that was enough for now. The next night started like the last. Quiet hums of classical music playing overhead in the restaurant, a strong scent of garlic and butter pouring out of the kitchen, and the sound of silver clinking neatly against plates. But something felt heavier in the air for Jamal Brooks. Maybe it was a lack of sleep. Maybe it was the way people pretended not to see what they saw, like the kindness he'd shown to the old couple of night before it had vanished the moment the restaurant lights dimmed. Not that he did it for attention. He never did. But what gnawed at him was the silence. Not even a word from his manager, who had witnessed the entire thing. No nod of approval. No thanks. Just a cold, "Back to your section," as if compassion was a waste of company time. As the night continued, the dining room filled with the usual crowd. Professionals with loosened ties, women in pearls laughing over wine, and the occasional guest who came not just to dine, but to be served in every sense of the word. Jamal moved quietly, gracefully, delivering dishes, pouring water, remembering preferences without needing to check the tablet. He was efficient, skilled, too good at his job for someone still making entry-level pay. But that was often the paradox. The better he was, the less he was noticed. It wasn't the kind of place where people remembered your name unless you made a mistake. A white gentleman at table 7 snapped his fingers. "Hey, boss, come over here." His words cut through the hum of conversation. Jamal walked over with practiced calm, his voice rounded kindly. "Yes, sir, how can I help?" "Our wine took forever," the man said, gesturing towards a bottle. "You on break or something?" Jamal blinked, confusion flickering for a second. The wine had been delivered less than 10 minutes after ordering. Still, he nodded slightly, managing what he always had to, a careful respect that didn't sound weak. "I apologize for the delay, sir. Would you like me to chill a replacement bottle?" The man stared at him. "Just bring the right food fast this time. No side talks in the kitchen. You're working." Jamal felt the edges of his heart tighten, not because of the harshness, but the familiarity of it. He'd heard different versions of it his whole life. It wasn't the words. It was the tone, the rehearsed belief in superiority. The assumption behind the eyes that said, "You're here to serve me because that's your place." As he walked back, plate orders in hand, the restaurant manager intercepted him halfway. "Jamal," he said, quickly but quietly, "that's the second table that's complained about you this week." Jamal frowned slightly. Was there more than one complaint tonight? "That's not the point. I'm just saying, don't engage too much. You've got a job. Just focus on that." There was no inquiry, no open conversation, just a warning. Like always, Jamal didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or shove his apron away, though most people in that moment would have. Instead, he nodded, clenched his jaw, and walked back into the kitchen. Inside, the heat hit him like a wall, but it wasn't just from the stoves. It was a heat that comes from swallowed injustice, from trying to explain something too subtle for words. Racism, in this case, didn't wear a hood or raise its voice. It whispered in professional tones, wore suits and managed restaurants, and quietly made you feel lesser. As he prepared the next order, a young white server leaned over to him. "What happened out there?" she asked. Jamal just smiled weakly. "Nothing new." She sighed. "You handled it better than I ever could. I swear I would have said something." Jamal looked at her and shrugged. "What would you have said? That they're wrong? That I'm right?" Sometimes people don't believe anything until they've lived it. As the kitchen hustled, he stood for a moment, spoon in one hand, lost in thought. He remembered a boyhood evening when he and his mother had been denied service at a cafe because the staff said it had just closed, while letting a white couple in a few seconds later. His mother had stood tall, held his hand tightly, and whispered, "We're not invisible. They just don't like to see what we represent." Those words still echoed. He never spoke of them, never shared the hurt he tucked away. To exist in places not built for you, and still choose kindness, that was his revolution. Later that evening, a server accidentally dropped her tray near the bar, and glasses shattered across the floor. Immediately, 2 male employees rushed to help her. The manager stepped down from the counter to ensure she was okay. Jamal had dropped a single glass 2 weeks ago. There had been no rush, just silence, then the meeting, then the warning. It wasn't hate. It wasn't fire. It was ice-cold, polite indifference, the kind people didn't believe until it carved lines in your self-worth after years. Around midnight, customers began to leave. Jamal, still unfed, still on his feet, kept cleaning up. He didn't think about food anymore. He thought about endurance, about grit and grace. In a corner, an older employee named Tony, a dishwasher who'd worked in restaurant for 25 years, watched Jamal thoughtfully. "You all right, kid?" he asked in a low voice when Jamal passed by. Jamal nodded again, that same quiet nod, the same one he always gave when he didn't want to fall apart. Tony shook his head. "You know, this place ain't made for us, but you're bigger than this place." Jamal looked down for a moment, then straight into Tony's eyes. "I don't want to be bigger than anyone. I just want to be seen." That night, as Jamal took the long walk home, because bus service had stopped and he couldn't afford a car, he crossed under a streetlight that flickered and hummed. The road was empty. In his deep coat pocket was a wrinkled dollar bill, all he had left after making sure his sister had enough for her textbooks next week. His stomach hadn't been full in over 24 hours, but his soul somehow, it hadn't caved in. He passed a homeless man under a bridge, bundled up in 2 jackets and a beanie, using fast food napkins as insulation under his back. Jamal stopped, reached into his bag, and removed the half bagel he managed to sneak from the staff tray after closing. He didn't ask. He just handed it over. The man looked up, eyes exhausted but thankful. Jamal smiled gently. "It's not much, but it's warm." Then he kept walking. Because no matter how many times the world tried to make him feel small, Jamal had already decided something. They could question his pace, his worth, even his dignity, but they could never take his kindness. That wasn't something he wore for others to see. It was who he was when no one was looking. The morning air was heavy with fog, clinging to the windows of small diners and silent gas stations like ghosts refusing to lift. Charleston hadn't quite woken up yet. The sidewalks were still wet with dew, and the sun was trying to push through the gray with warm fingers. Jamal Brooks stood alone at the bus stop, the thin fabric of his jacket hardly protecting him from the October cold. His eyes were tired, deep with long nights, and his feet ached, the kind of ache that doesn't go away even after sleep. Sleep had been short and broken anyway, interrupted by thoughts of bills, schedules, and rent deadlines. Another day, another shift. He tucked his hands into his pockets and tightened his jaw. Behind that worn quietness, a storm lived. Memories of being overlooked, shouted at, talked down to. He had spent years learning how to keep that storm inside, to move through a world that often didn't go silent for people like him. In so many spaces, he was invisible unless something went wrong. Still, he stood tall, even if no one saw it. Even if his silence was mistaken for weakness. He knew who he was. When he arrived at the restaurant, it was still closed to public. Staff scrubbing tables and rearranging furniture, the usual routine. Jamal changed slowly in the back room, folding his old hoodie, smoothing the front of his white shirt. Another long night ahead. Another day of pretending everything was just fine. Around noon, as the kitchen began prepping the lunch orders and the first customers trickled in, the front doors of the restaurant suddenly opened wider than usual. The jingle of the bell above the entrance rang just a little louder. The sound made heads turn. Jamal wasn't close enough to see it, but he could hear the manager greet someone casually, then shift tones when he saw who it was. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you?" The man's voice in return was calm, warm, and old, just like Jamal remembered. "I believe I'm here to return a kindness. I'm looking for one of your waiters." Jamal emerged from the side hallway, drying his hands on a towel, and his breath caught in his chest. There stood the same elderly gentleman he'd fed 2 nights ago. Except this time, he didn't wear the threadbare coat or the frayed scarf. He wore a deep navy suit, perfectly pressed, a burgundy tie sitting neat and proud against a crisp shirt. His old fedora was replaced by a dark wool hat. Beside him stood a younger man carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a sleek overcoat. A driver, perhaps, or maybe an assistant, Jamal guessed. Everyone fell quiet for a beat, servers silently watching from the back, and the manager blinking in confusion. The old man smiled gently when he saw Jamal. "There you are," he said, as if greeting an old friend. "You didn't think you'd see us again, did you?" Jamal quickly stepped forward, still confused. "Sir, it's good to see you. I didn't expect. You didn't have to come back." "I did, and I did it because people like you are rare," the man replied. "You gave when most would pretend not to notice. You offered dignity when the world teaches people to walk past struggle." The manager cleared his throat. "Can I ask, what's this regarding exactly?" The old man turned politely to him, still courteous but firm. "It's about integrity. You don't need to worry. This young man is about to have a very different week." A soft hush rippled through the staff. Whispers stirred in the corners. Jamal looked embarrassed. "I just did what I thought was right. I didn't expect anything." "And that's what makes it matter," the gentleman said. He motioned to his assistant, who stepped forward and handed Jamal a white envelope, thick and slightly warm from having been clutched tightly. Jamal held it awkwardly in both hands. "Sir, what is this?" "An opportunity," came the reply. "I didn't introduce myself the other night, and I regret that now. My name is Henry Langston." Silence again, but heavier this time. The name sounded familiar to a few around. To Jamal, it rang like a forgotten story. Henry saw the confusion and continued. "I'm a retired civil rights attorney. I spent 40 years fighting discrimination in courts you've never heard of, across towns that often didn't want change. My wife and I created a scholarship foundation in our retirement. We also fund local programs for young people of color pursuing trades and careers." He smiled deeply, his eyes full of something that had endured pain and still chose peace. "We were coming back from a long session at a legal aid center the night we met you. We'd given our day to others and had forgotten to take care of ourselves. Life does that sometimes. And then you came and reminded us kindness still lives in the quiet corners." He paused. "I've funded 42 scholarships to date. I'd like you to be number 43. The room began to spin in Jamal's peripherals. "What?" Henry's assistant opened a folder. "Full tuition to the Culinary Institute of Charleston. Monthly stipend for transport and supplies. Guaranteed intern placement in our foundation's nonprofit kitchen work study." Jamal's mouth parted, but no sound came. He looked at the envelope, trembling quietly in his fingers. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Henry said kindly. "You already spoke volumes, just by who you are." Jamal blinked hard, tried to keep himself from falling apart in front of the entire staff. The manager now stood awkwardly to the side, all his earlier posture slowly folding. "I'm just the waiter," Jamal whispered. "No," Henry said firmly. "You're a man of character. The kind this world desperately needs more of." Jamal looked back at his co-workers, at the blank expressions, the stunned eyes, the quiet mouths that had muttered behind his back, that had questioned his rhythm, his dignity, his place. He turned to Henry slowly. "Thank you. I won't waste this. I know you won't. As the gentleman walked away, the air hung thick with meaning. Jamal stood there, the envelope still in hand, his heart pounding. He wasn't just seen today. He was recognized, not by someone looking down or looking past, but by someone who understood the courage it takes to keep showing up in a world that pretends not to see you. For the rest of that shift, the air felt different. Servers greeted him with nods. Even the silence around him wasn't loaded anymore. It was respectful, peaceful. Jamal finished his shift just as he had every other night. He cleaned his station. He stacked the dishes. But that night, when he changed back into his hoodie and zipped it halfway up, he carried something with him. The weight of hope, the kind that changes lives. On his way out, he looked at the locked restaurant doors, the empty street, and the sky above whispering slow goodbyes to the evening sun. Kindness had returned to him, unexpected, undeserved in his eyes, but exactly when he needed it most. Because sometimes, when the world watches you get with nothing in your hand, someone in the quiet watches and gives back more than you thought you deserved. Long before the polished uniform and the long restaurant shifts, before the scholarship offer, and even the quiet act of compassion that led to it, Jamal Brooks was just a boy from a neighborhood that never made the news unless something went wrong. His world had always been a little smaller, a little tougher, and a lot louder than most. He grew up in a 2-room apartment on the east side of Charleston, where the floors creaked anger and the walls whisper hunger. On those cracked living room tiles, Jamal learned how to ride make-believe bicycles, how to count using soup cans, and how to hold his breath whenever an eviction notice showed up on the front door again. His mother, Denise Brooks, was a quiet fighter. She worked 2 part-time jobs, one as a night shift nurse at a local care home, and another cleaning buildings most people wouldn't even walk into after dark. Jamal used to wait by the window at night, watching street lamps flicker and buses roar by, until he could see her coming home. Most nights, she limped up the steps with fatigue so deep it made her shoulders sag, but she never came in without a tired smile. "Still here, baby," she'd whisper, and he'd nod, pretending he hadn't been crying himself to sleep moments before. But there were good days, too, simple joys. When his mom had energy, they made grilled cheese sandwiches on the stovetop, pressed down with an iron skillet that once belonged to Jamal's grandmother. They played old soul records and danced in their socks. Jamal would spin in circles until his stomach hurt, his mother laughing like a girl again as her stress lines melted under beat of Marvin Gaye or Al Green. She called him her little moon, said he lit up her darkest nights. But the world outside their door wasn't always as soft. On Jamal's first day of school, a teacher mistook him for another black boy who had been suspended the year before and made him sit outside the class as a precaution. He was 5, too young to know what was happening, but not too young to feel it. By middle school, Jamal had learned to lower his voice when speaking to authority, not because he was loud, but because they assumed he would be. He learned to keep receipts for everything, school supplies, snacks, even bus fare, because he'd seen classmates of color question about stealing when their hands were empty. He learned to walk faster, smile more, argue less. And somewhere along the way, he learned to disappear, to become a background character in the very world he wanted to belong to. One memory burned especially deep. He was 16 and had saved every bit of his after-school job money to buy his mother a used purse she'd been eyeing in a thrift store window, a deep green faux leather bag with gold accents and a slightly torn strap. It wasn't much, but it was beautiful to them. On the day he bought it, a store clerk followed him through the aisles. When Jamal finally walked to the register, the clerk grabbed the purse from his hand and asked if he had any business affording it. The word echoed in the air like poison. Business. They called the police. Jamal stood outside in the summer heat, hands raised, heart pounding like a drum in a funeral procession, all while 2 squad cars pulled up with flashing lights as if he tried to rob a bank. The receipt was still clutched in his sweat-drenched fist. "That boy matches a description," someone would later say. The charges were dropped, of course. There were no charges to begin with, just stigma and humiliation served in daylight. A quiet apology that had no heart behind it. That night, he gave his mother the purse anyway. She held it like a treasure, but looked at him differently, Heartbroken, he had to fight for something so small. They sat on the couch in silence, watching shadows crawl across the wall. "You didn't deserve that," she whispered. He shook his head. "It's okay. I'll get used to it." "No, baby," she said firmly. "You don't get used to being disrespected. You learn how to survive it, but don't let it turn you cold." Those words never left him. He lived by them. And when his mother passed away from complications linked to untreated hypertension, because she couldn't afford to skip shifts for doctor's appointments, that moment carved something permanent into Jamal's soul. Her death had been quiet. No headlines, no GoFundMe, no public outcry. Just another number in another bracket of the system. But to Jamal, she was everything. And her life had been one long lesson in silent generosity. So when the world tried to make him hard, he chose softness. When people ignored him, he acknowledged others. When waiters were mistreated or invisible, he tipped what little he had. When an old man and his wife walked into a restaurant one night, cold and lost, Jamal didn't hesitate. He gave them his first warm meal in over 12 hours. Not to be noble, not to be seen on camera, but because kindness had been pressed into his skin since boyhood. Nothing in him doubted it. He had survived without malice. That was already a kind of victory. And now, standing with an envelope in his pocket, the recipient of a blessing he never asked for, he began to feel the full weight and beauty of every moment that had brought him here. He looked at himself in the mirror later that night, the same mirror that hung near the apartment door for years. Small, slightly cracked in the corner, but still standing. Staring at his reflection, Jamal whispered, "I didn't break." Tears filled his eyes as he saw not just a man he'd become, but every version of himself who wanted to give up. The boy staring through eviction notices, the teen accused without reason, the young man burying his mother the day before a shift. He wiped his face and smiled gently. "I'm still here," he said softly, "and I still choose to be kind." 1 year later, the streets of Charleston looked the same, but for Jamal Brooks, everything felt different. The same uneven sidewalks cracked beneath his steps. The same distant buzz of buses and the saxophone of a street performer moaned through the air just like it did 12 months ago. But as Jamal stood on the corner of a once-forgotten lot on Meeting Street, beneath a freshly installed sign and beside a bright red food truck with gleaming white letters, he no longer felt like a background shadow in the city story. The name on the truck, Grit and Grace, a tribute to the city, to his mother, to the boy who grew up learning how to make miracles from leftovers and love. The grand opening was modest, nothing viral, nothing flashy, just neighbors, customers, teachers from local schools, single mothers pushing strollers, a few old friends from the kitchen life. Even Tony, the dishwasher from his old job, came dressed in his Sunday best and smiled like he was watching his own son cross a graduation stage. Henry Langston and his wife were, of course, seated right up front at a small sidewalk table covered in a faded checkered cloth. Football players and fashion bloggers weren't here. This wasn't a perfect Instagram moment, but it didn't need to be, because kindness doesn't always make noise when it wins. Sometimes it just shows up, opens quietly, and feeds people without asking who they are. Jamal stood behind the truck's small sliding window, flipping burgers, tossing fries with practiced joy, and layering sandwiches with tenderness in every motion. He called out each customer's name like it was music. He joked, smiled, and wiped sweat from his brow, like he hadn't once been written off as just a waiter. A little girl walked up shyly, her hand clutching a wrinkled dollar. She pointed at the menu with wide, hungry eyes. "I only have this," she said softly. Jamal bent low, met her eyes, and smiled. "You got enough for a whole plate," he whispered, giving her not just a sandwich, but extra fries and a juice box. Her face lit up. Her mother tried to object, but Jamal only nodded gently. "You're both taken care of. I've been where you are." Because he had, many times. By the end of the day, Grit and Grace had served over 100 local people, some who could afford it, many who couldn't. Jamal didn't worry too much about profit right now. He worried about purpose. Each meal served was a love letter to his roots, his pain, his mother, his community, and the faith that giving never left a person empty, even when it cost him everything. Later that evening, when the crowd trickled away and all that was left were discarded napkins and the soft hum of downtown twilight, Jamal sat beside Mr. Langston on a bench just outside the truck. They looked at the people still milling about, a sense of life blooming where silence once sat. Langston sipped his lemonade and looked over at the young man he once saw giving away his only meal. "You remember when I told you you'd have a different week?" he asked, grinning. Jamal nodded, laughing under his breath. "I didn't think you meant a different life." Langston paused and added, "You know what I saw that night?" "What?" "I saw a man hungry, but not for food. Hungry to change something, without breaking everything. Hungry not to be bitter, just better. And I thought, that's someone worth planting seeds in." Jamal swallowed, quietly emotional. There was a long pause between them, the kind of silence that feels sacred. He thought back to everything it took to reach this moment. The long walks, the double shifts, the sting of being accused, the empty nights after his mother passed, the dishes he'd wash while praying under his breath for one lucky break. And it wasn't lost on him how close he'd been to giving up 100 times before. So many people in his position snapped. Some turned hard. Some turned angry. Some stayed broken. But Jamal, he learned to bend without breaking. He watched the moon rise slowly over the skyline, remembering the way his mom used to call him her little moon, the glow she swore he gave off, even in darkness. "I wish she could see this," he said quietly. "Maybe she does," Henry replied. They sat in stillness until Jamal leaned back and exhaled a full breath, the kind you only release when you build a new version of yourself in the ashes of the old. The following Monday, Jamal returned to his former high school, not as a student, not as a server, but as a guest speaker. The invitation came from a teacher who had once seen Jamal get sent detention for talking back during a lesson on civil rights. Irony, perhaps, but life has a way of flipping the script when the heart stays steady. He walked slowly onto the auditorium stage, slightly nervous, but with words burning like a sunrise under his skin. A room full of teenagers sat with restless eyes, unsure why they'd been ushered in. Then he began to speak, not with authority, not with fame, not with theatrics, but as someone who had tasted life from the bottom up, and the truth poured out of him, about growing up in a place where good deeds often went unnoticed, about surviving shame without turning it into bitterness, about working twice as hard to be seen half as much, about handing over his own dinner to an elderly couple, not knowing it would feed the very door that would later open his destiny. He didn't preach. He didn't exaggerate. He spoke like a brother, like someone who had been in those seats, praying to matter. And toward the end, he looked at them all with a long, piercing quiet. In a world where people will try to erase you, let your kindness be the thing they can never silence. The room remained still. Some students cried. Others just sat, hugged by something invisible, a kind of hope most of them rarely felt in that building. That day, Jamal didn't offer anything material. He didn't promise miracles. But he did remind them that pain isn't always punishment. Struggle isn't always failure, and that dignity lives in how you treat others when no one is watching. Back at the food truck that evening, Jamal returned to work with more fire in his chest than ever. He greeted each customer like the first one, and when he looked out the street, he imagined all the other Jamals still walking this world, tired, quiet, overlooked, but carrying thunder in their chests. He cooked for them, too. And maybe, just maybe, when someone walks by his truck years from now and reads Grit and Grace, they won't just see a food stop. They'll see history, heart, a life rebuilt not on revenge or reputation, but on a plate of food shared in kindness, on a cold night, when he himself had nothing to eat.